Okay, got it. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. Take your hand, let me zoom out here for a second, your left hand. Okay, you're going to put it on the paper and then you're going to trace it. But you do want your palm to be face up. Okay, so I'm going to just draw a hand so that it's not ugly. Well, actually it might be more ugly, but you get the idea. Okay, that's my hand. Okay, then you are going to label each of your fingers with one of the main trig reference angles. So this is going to be 0 degrees. Okay. Then anybody, what is the next degree in the unit circle? Because you have 5 reference angles and you also have 5 fingers. So what is the next reference angle? You can stick with degrees.
30.
Okay, 30. Then what's the one after that?
45.
Yes, then, oops.
60.
And then last one is 90. Okay, so next thing we need to do now is label all of those in radians. So pretty much for pre-cal, you're going to be like radians all day. They almost never use degrees. So let's relabel those. So 0 is still 0. Okay, do we remember what 30 is? Pi over 6. Next one is going to be pi fourths, then pi thirds, and then 90 degrees is pi halves. Okay? So, here is the trick. If you hold your left hand up, okay, like this is going to represent the x-axis, which is 0 degrees, right here. And then your thumb is going to represent the y-axis, which we know now is 90 degrees. Okay, you're going to identify your reference angle. And you're going to bend that finger down, okay? So reference angle is how far you are from either 0 or pi. Okay, your sign fingers are going to be below the bend, and your cosine fingers are going to be above the bend. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the square root of how many fingers there are, and then you're going to put it over 2. Okay? So get ready for fun. Okay, so the first thing that we want is the sine of pi 6th, yeah? Now, if you memorize unit circle, awesome, you can do it like that. But here's how you do it with like the little shortcut. So pi 6th is your second finger, so I'm going to fold it down. And then how many fingers, unmute yourself, is below that finger? Only 1, right? So it'd be the square root of 1 finger over 2. Well, the square root of 1 and 1 are the same, so it's 1/2. Okay, now, let's say I want cosine of pi 6th. That's going to be the square root of how many fingers are above the bend over 2. So I would count, this is my pi 6th finger, so I have 1, 2, 3, so then it's going to be root 3 over 2. Okay, so it's really just like putting a pattern to trig so that you don't have to redraw the entire circle. Okay, so now let's say you're doing sine pi fourths. So look at your finger. Pi fourths is your middle finger, so you're going to bend it down. Then remember, sine are your bottom fingers, cosine are your top fingers. So for sine, how many fingers do we have on the bottom? There we go. So then it would be square root of 2 over 2, which is what the sine of pi fourths is. Now, you'll notice that when I have this finger down, right, my sine fingers are on bottom, my cosine fingers on top. There's also 2 on top, so cosine of pi fourths is also root 2 over 2. Okay, so now let's go sine pi thirds. So pi thirds, okay, show me your fingers on Zoom. Okay, hold it up, bend down your pi thirds finger. And then when you bend it down, you have how many fingers below it? 3, so it'd be root 3 over 2. Okay, but on my same pi thirds finger, which is here, okay, my cosine fingers is on top, so that means I only have 1 up here, so it would be square root of 1 over 2, right? But nobody would write it like that. You'd just say 1/2. Okay, so using our fingers thing, I want you to think about what the sign of 0 is. So 0 is your pinky, so you fold it down. Okay, then I have no fingers below this, then it would be the square root of 0 over 2. Well, that's just 0. Okay? Now let's do sine of pi halves. So 0 is your pinky, pi halves is your thumb. So you're going to hold down your pi halves finger right here. How many fingers are below your thumb?
4.
So it'd be root 4 over 2. But then think about what's the square root of 4?
0.
So it's really just 2 over 2, which is 1.
1.
1.
Make sense? So it's kind of like a silly way to remember it, but it can save you time if you don't already have the unit circle memorized. Okay. So we're going to do some more practice. Okay? Am I good to take this paper off? Okay. All right, so we are going to, let's skip tan for now. Let's go to the other angles, okay? So in the unit circle, okay, your hand is here in quadrant 1. So do you guys remember all students take calculus? Okay, so those letters represent, okay, which functions are positive in that quadrant. So for example, A, all of them are positive. Okay, S, only sine is positive. That means that cosine and tangent are both negative. Okay, we'll put all positive here. Okay, then for T, only tan is positive. And then for C, only cosine is positive. So that basically is going to tell you which of those are positive in that quadrant. Now remember that right here, this is pi. Okay, so that's 1 full pi for 180 degrees, okay? So what you're going to do for any other angle, okay, because remember, you don't want to draw the big giant unit circle. Ooh, look, this is actually what we did right before. Okay, unless you still have this bad boy laying around, okay, then for all these other angles, you would have to be able to think about where they are in the circle. So you're going to identify your reference angle. Okay, and remember, that's the distance from the x-axis. Okay, but you're going to do it on your hand, okay? Then you're going to determine the value, and then you're going to determine the sign. Okay, and when I say sign, I mean plus or minus, not like sine and cosine. Okay? So, let's start with the first one. So we have the sine of 5 pi 6. So the first thing you're going to do is think about, okay, 5 pi 6 means you're looking for your pi 6 finger. So remember, this one's 0, pi 6, pi fourths, pi thirds, pi halves. So if I want pi 6, that's here. Fold it down. Remember, sine are your bottom fingers. How many do we have?
One.
We have 1, so it's root 1 over 2, which is 1/2. Okay, but then we have to go and check where we are in the unit circle. So I'm going to redraw my circle here. Okay, this is pi, which means that that's 6 out of 6, right? So if I only want to do 5 out of 6, then if I'm here at 6, I'd have to go back one. That puts me here. So if I'm in the S quadrant, that means that sign is positive. Okay, now let's do 7 pi 6. So we're still on the pi 6th finger. We're still doing sine, so I know it's going to be a half again. But now I want to be at 7 pi 6. So think about it. If I go all the way over to 6 pi 6, now I need to go further into that bottom quadrant. And then remember, it's all students take calculus. So that means that only tan is positive. That means that my 1/2 needs to be negative. Okay, now let's do cosine 7 pi 6. So, looking back at your hand, pi 6 is still here, fold it down. I have 1 sine finger, that's why I picked a half. I have 3 cosine fingers, so that means that my answer is going to be root 3 over 2. But then I have to choose if I want to keep it positive or if I want to turn it negative. Okay? So, think about it. If I'm at 7 pi 6, that's down here, that was my pink line. Okay, then only tan is positive. That means that cosine is negative. Make sense? Okay, so what I want you to do is fill out the next row. Okay? So, fill out the next row. So we want sine of 3 pi 4ths. So tell me where, so pi 4ths, hold up your hand, right? You want this guy. 0, pi 6, pi 4ths, pi 3rds, pi halves, fold it down. Okay, then you can remember top and bottom. Okay, it's kind of bad, but just pretend. Okay, like sine, like sin, you go down to hell. So that's why it's these two. Okay, get it? Sin, down. Okay, and then cosine's up. Okay, so if I want sine of 3 pi 4ths, I have 2 fingers, so it's root 2 over 2. But then I have to draw my quadrant to see where 3 pi 4ths puts me. And what I would do every single time is I would label pi as a whole. So if these are all 4ths, then I want to label this 4 pi 4ths, right? So then if I only want to be at 3 pi 4ths, that means that I'm going to have to start at 4, but I'm going to have to go backwards 1. That puts me here. And then I'm going to label my quadrant. So it's all students take calculus. So if I'm in this quadrant, then I know 3 pi 4ths sine is going to be positive. So it's positive root 2 over 2. Okay? Now, for cosine, remember that if my pi 4ths finger is down, 0, pi 6, pi 4ths, that's this one, fold it down. Okay, then my cosine fingers, I also only have 2. So remember that for the 4ths, your sine and cosine are going to be the same, because you have 2 fingers above, 2 fingers below. Okay, but if I'm in this 3 pi 4ths right here, okay, what's the letter for that quadrant? All students take calculus. So I'm in the sine quadrant. That means that my cosine's root 2 over 2 is going to be negative. Okay? Now, for cosine, I know it's going to be root 2 over 2 again. Okay, because I'm still in a 4ths type angle. But I'm at 5 pi 4, so then think about where that would be. If I'm here at 4 pi 4ths on the axis, then I'm going to have to go further to get to 5 pi 4ths. So that would put me in the tangent quadrant, which means that cosine is negative. Okay, I'm going to give you a minute to fill out, I said a minute, I'll give you longer than a minute. Do those next 2 rows. And then y'all unmute yourselves if you have questions. Y'all are suspiciously quiet.
On the thing that you sent us,
Uh-huh.
it's blank.
Did you go past the first page and like scroll down? Because the very top part is where you would have drawn your hand. But it should be 3 pages, so you should be on the second page.
Like, I have the 3 pages, but there's no, like, questions on them. It's just, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and etc.
You know what I bet it is? I bet it's because you don't have the same math thing that I do. Let me save it as a PDF, and then I'll do it one more time. Hang on one sec. Is everybody having that same issue?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going into classroom. Okay, so get out of it, and I'm going to re-upload it as a PDF. File. Okay, so maybe give it like 10 seconds and then try to reopen it and see if it'll go now. How's it look now? Better? Fixed?
I still see nothing.
What? No. Okay, maybe go out of the classroom and then go back in or something. Because for me, it's showing up as a PDF now. Anybody seeing it?
I think if you open the document and then where it says open, you can open it in a different tab, and then where it says open with, if you open with Google Docs and then make a copy, you should be able to type on it as well as see all of the questions.
Okay.
That's what I did.
So open it.
So I
as a
opened the
Google
doc
Doc.
with Google Docs and then make a copy.
Oh. And then you guys could actually write or annotate on it like using your touch screen too, right? Okay, so the other option is I can just leave it up on my screen. Do y'all know what time this period ends? Off the top of your head, anybody?
3:25.
25. Oh, okay. Wow. We have so long left. Okay, so I'm gonna pull it back up on my screen, If you can't get the thing to download, maybe just pull out a piece of paper, okay? Okay. So, next one is sine 2 pi thirds. Okay, so remember, first thing, find your pi thirds finger. 0, pi 6, pi 4, pi thirds. Fold it down. Okay, then I want sine. Sin, you go down to hell, right? Haha. Okay, so it's 3. So it's root 3 over 2. That's your numeric answer. And then for cosine, remember, it's that same finger while I have it pulled down. Okay, I have 3 for sine, only 1 for cosine, so it's a half. Okay, but now I have to pick my quadrants. Okay, and then actually I can go ahead and come over and mark my other cosine as a half. So you can get the numbers easy, and then you can just think about like what quadrant you're in. So if I'm in thirds, my pi is a 3 pi thirds. So then if I want to be at 2 pi thirds, what letter do I end up in? A, S, or T? Correct, S. So it's all students take calculus. So I would have to come up here to S. That means that sine is positive. But what does that make cosine for number 10? Negative. Okay, then where would 4 pi thirds end up? This is 3 pi thirds. I went backwards to get to 2 pi thirds, then 4 pi thirds would have to rotate down into the T quadrant, which means that tan is positive, but cosine is negative. You got it. Okay. Bottom row, we're doing pi halves. So 0, pi 6, pi 4, pi thirds, pi halves. Pi halves is here. Fold it down, yeah? And then sine, I have all my fingers on the bottom. Remember the shortcut for that is that it's root 4 over 2. But then root 4 over 2 reduces to 2 over 2, which is just 1. So remember that any time that all your fingers are on the bottom, your answer is 1. You can work through that process, but if all of them are on bottom, you know it's going to be 1. Now, back to my pi halves finger. If I want cosine, those are supposed to be my fingers above the thumb, but there are not any, so that means that one's automatically 0. Okay, then let's label our little circle here. So if this is a full pi, we're looking at halves. I can tell from the denominator. That means this is 2 pi halves. So if I go backwards, that's 1 pi half. If I go forward, that's 3 pi halves. Okay. And so then if I'm at 3 pi halves, ooh, actually it's good that we talked about this. So it's all students take calculus. Okay, when you're on an axis, like for example here, 3 pi halves, I'm perfectly in between, then just look at the quadrants around it. So if I want sine is negative here and here, well then it's also negative in the middle. So for my 3 pi halves, it's not going to be 1, it's going to be negative 1. Okay, but you can also remember from pre-cal, right, it's cosine comma sine. So you can also kind of tell that when you're at the bottom of the circle, that y value would have to be negative. Okay. All right, next one we said was 0. You can't have a positive or a negative on 0. But think about if you're at 3 pi halves, okay, for cosine, on the left side it would have been negative. But on the right side, cosine is positive. That's why it's 0 in the middle. Because if it changes from negative to positive, then on the axis it must have been 0. So that's kind of like a different way to think about it too. Okay, next one we want cosine of pi. Now remember that your reference angle is how far you are off of the axis. So if I'm on pi, how many degrees am I off the x-axis? It would be 0, right? Because I'm literally on the axis. I'm not off it at all. So for pi, you're going to use your 0 degrees, which would be this one. Because you're not off the axis at all. You're perfectly on it. So you fold it down. Okay, I have all my fingers on top for cosine, all 4 of them. So I know my answer is going to be 1. But then I have to determine if I want to keep it a positive 1 or if I want to change it to a negative 1. So you do your little all students take calculus. And then if I'm at pi, think about cosine. Okay, it's going to be negative up here, it's negative down here, because I'm in my sine and tangents. Those are the only ones that are positive. Then that means that it's negative in the middle as well. Because cosine would be negative in the top and bottom that surround pi. Okay? And then 2 pi, think about if you're at pi, you're here. Well, then if you're at 2 pi, you're here, which is the same as 0. So that means that I would be between A and C. For all, cosine is positive. For cosine, cosine is positive. So that means that for that one, I would put a positive 1. Okay, how are we feeling? Thoughts? Anything? Nobody? Okay, so then the only other thing that we're going to talk about is, we do need to go back and do tan, I guess. So tan, all that you would do, hopefully you remember from pre-cal, how do we find tangent? Do you remember, anybody? Okay, yeah, so tangent is sine divided by cosine. And so the reason that he said multiply is that if you're dividing by cosine, right, we're going to have to multiply by the reciprocal. So let's just run through that top row and do tangent. Oh yeah, and then here it says dividing by cosine means multiplying by its reciprocal, which basically just means you're going to flip it. Okay? So take a look at the first one. We want tan of pi 6. Okay, so we're going to do sine divided by cosine. So get out your pi 6 finger. So remember, it's 0 pi 6. That's right here. For sine, I have 1 finger, so that's 1/2. Divided by cosine. So if I'm here at pi 6, I have root 3 over 2. But then remember, nobody would actually do it like that, right? You'd multiply by the reciprocal. So I would say, okay, well then really, that's going to be 1/2 multiplied by 2 over root 3. So I would take this guy and I would flip it. And then from there, what do you notice is going to happen? 1/2 multiplied by 2 over root 3. Anything you notice might cancel?
2.
Yeah, 2's are gone. Now, what else would your pre-cal teacher have made you do?
Multiply the top and bottom by root 3.
Yes, okay, but we're not going to do that. Okay, for the AP test, if it was multiple choice, you may have to do that, but typically they don't really follow that rule that you can't have square roots on the bottom. So we're just going to leave it like this. Amazing if you remember that, but not really necessary. Okay? All right, so let's do tan. So tan pi fourths is here. Fold it down. Sine, I have root 2 over 2. Cosine, I have root 2 over 2, because I have my middle finger, right? So if it's root 2 over 2 divided by root 2 over 2, anything divided by itself always gives you what?
1.
Yeah, 1. And then if you wanted to do kind of like we did here and multiply by the reciprocal, you totally can, but you're going to notice that everything ends up crossing out. So when I convert that into multiplying, my 2 on tops and my 2 on bottom cross out, and then my root 2's cross out as well. So when everything cancels out, it's just basically a 1 left over. Okay, so I'm going to give you a sec to do tan pi thirds. Do it. You can do it. So remember, it's sine over cosine. Okay, so what is the sine of pi thirds? So 0, pi 6, pi 4, pi thirds is here. That means that sine is root what?
3 over 2.
Okay, and then what's cosine? Cosine would be 1/2, right? Because you'd have one finger. But then I'd have to take that root 3 over 2 and multiply by 2 over 1. And then you'll see that your 2's are still going to cross out. And your final answer there would be root 3. You can put it over 1 if you want to, but it's not really necessary. Make sense? Okay, now for tan, remember pi halves is your thumb. So you're here. So you'd say, fold your thumb down. My sine is root 4 over 2, which we know is just 1, divided by. But then if my thumb is folded down and I want cosine, I have to look at my fingers above the bend, but there aren't any. Then it would be 1 divided by 0. Are you allowed to do that? Does anybody? No. So what do we put instead? Do you guys remember?
Undefined.
Yes, undefined. Okay, so whenever you end up with a divided by 0, you know that that's your undefined angle for tan. Okay? All right, so we don't have to do all 3 tans, but let's do number 4. Okay, so if I'm here, I want sine over cosine. All I'm doing is looking at the denominator. If it's a 6th, then I know that I'm doing my pi 6th finger, which is this one. Then I'm doing sine over cosine. So my sine is a 1/2. And then I'm just going to go ahead and flip my cosine now that we've done a couple of these. So my cosine is root 3 over 2 because I have 3 fingers above the bend, right? But I'm going to flip it to be a 2 over root 3. So this is sine, and then this is cosine flipped. And then from there, my 2's here are going to cross out. My answer is going to be 1 over root 3. But then I have to check my my quadrant. So, if this is pi 6 out of 6, then if I go all the way around the circle, that would be 12 pi 6. Now, think about why that is. That's the same as 2 pi, right? So if I go to 6 pi 6, that's not enough. Double it, that's 12 pi 6, but I only want 11. So then I would go around to 12 and then be like, wait, too far, that puts me here. And so remember that if I'm in the C quadrant, that means that sine and tangent are both negative. Only cosine is positive there. Does that make sense? Maybe. Okay. Then we'll go ahead and do the next one. So tan pi fourths, and actually really we can just peek back up here. If it's a pi fourths, what did tan come out to be when we did the pi fourths last time? Came out to be 1, but then I just have to go back and check my quadrant. So if I want 7 pi fourths, Okay, here's 4 pi fourths. That's not enough. Then if I double it, that's going to be 8 pi fourths. Because remember, that's your 2 pi. But remember, I don't want a full 8, I only want 7. So that would put me here again. And so then if it's all students take calculus, that means that cosine is positive, but that means that tan is negative. Okay, how are you guys feeling about that? Easy, hard?
It's first difficult thinking I've done in months.
Say that one more time.
It's the only difficult thinking I've done in months.
Yeah. Now remember, you have the option to just memorize the unit circle. If the hand trig like confuses you, just, throw it out. Totally fine. As long as you know how to do trig. I mean, that's the basic point, right? Okay. So, now we have to do the other functions. Okay, so I'll just kind of briefly remind you, when you took this in when you did this in pre-cal, each of your trig functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, they each have a partner that's their reciprocal identity, is what it's called, okay? So, do we remember which one goes with which? Who is cosecant the reciprocal identity for? Which one? Correct. Correct. So cosecant is 1 over sine, okay, which we're just going to call sine flipped. Okay, then that makes secant 1 over cosine, or cosine flipped. And then cotan, instead of being sine over cosine, it's going to be cosine over sine. So basically, you're going to do exactly what you just did, but you're going to flip it, okay? So I will do one of them with you, and then I'm going to give you a sec to do some of these on your own and see if you get it. Okay, so first one is cosecant pi sixth. So I'd go 0, pi 6 is here, fold it down. Then who's cosecant's partner?
Sine.
Sine is correct, so I have one sine finger, that means it's a half, but I have to flip it. So instead of putting a half, I'm going to put 2 over 1. Now that's the same as 2, I guess we can just put 2. Okay, but then I have to check my quadrant. Well, if I'm at pi 6, that's just in that very top quadrant, right? So here's 6 pi 6. Well, then I'm in the A quadrant, that means my 2 is positive. So it's 1/2, but I flipped it. Okay, now let's do the secant of pi 6. We'll just finish out that row. So for secant of pi 6, I'm still here. Sine is 1 finger, cosine is 3 fingers. So it's root 3 over 2, but then I have to flip it. So when I have root 3 over 2 flipped, that's going to be 2 over root 3. But then I'm still in that A quadrant for pi 6, so I know that it's going to be positive. Okay, next one is secant 5 pi 6. So it's still a secant, it's still a 6, so I know it's going to be a 2 over root 3. The only thing I have to check is where this angle is. So if this is 6 pi 6 on the axis and I only want 5, then I'm going to have to rewind 1 to be here. So remember, it's all students take calculus. That puts me in the S quadrant, which means that sine is positive. But remember that secant is cosine's partner. So if cosine is negative here, then when I flip it, it would have stayed negative. Okay, and then for your cotan, remember you're just dividing sine and cosine, but you're going to put cosine on top for cotan. So pi 6 this here, remember, cosine on top is going to be root 3 over 2, divided by sine on bottom is going to be 1/2. And then remember, the way that you would work that division out is you would flip the bottom and multiply. So really, it would be root 3 over 2 multiplied by 2 over 1. Which means those 2's are going to get out of here, and my answer is going to be root 3. Then I would have to choose my sign. Remember, we already found 5 pi 6. It was here. Sine is positive, but that means that tan would have been negative. And when I flip tan, it's going to retain that negative and stay negative. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute or a little bit of time here to give that a shot. So try those next 2 rows. And y'all unmute yourselves and ask questions if you have them.
Can you zoom back in on the paper?
Oh yeah, duh, sure. Uh-huh. Okay, so first row, we want cosecant of pi fourths. So we're going to find sine of pi fourths and then flip it. So what's the sine of pi fourths?
Root 3 over 2.
Make sure your pi fourths finger would be that middle one though. So it'd be root 2 over 2. And then flip it would be 2 over root 2. Okay, and then remember that for secant and for cosecant, okay, those are both sine and cosine flip, but since they're both 2 fingers anyway, it doesn't really matter when you flip it, right? So it would still be 2 over root 2. Also, those are both in your original first quadrant, so you don't have to worry about like any weird sign changes or anything like that. They're both going to stay positive. Okay, now let's do 5 pi fourths. So I'm going to find sine, and then I'm going to flip it. Okay, remember that's sine flipped. So pi fourths was 2 over root 2. But now I have to choose my sign, meaning like positive or negative. So if this is 4 pi fourths, and I want a 5th pi fourth, I'd go all the way around to 4, but then I'd have to keep going. That puts me here. Remember, all students take calculus. So that means I'm in tan's quadrant. Tan is positive. That means that sine is negative. When I flip it, it would be negative. Okay, then for the next one. Okay, both of your pi fourths are, well, remember we're doing cosine divided by sine. But since they're both root 2 over 2, when I divide those, I know I'm just going to get a 1. But then I have to determine what sign I want. Do I want it to be positive or do I want it to be negative? So if I'm down here in this Yes, positive, because I'm in the tan quadrant, I'm in T, and so when I flip something that's positive, it's going to stay positive. All right, I'll give you a little bit of time to finish that next row. So cosecant is going to be sine flipped. Secant is going to be cosine flipped. Okay, so for the first one, for number 9, what are y'all getting? We want the sine
2
of...
over root.
Yes. 2 over root 3, right?
Root 3.
Yep. Okay, what about for number 10?
Negative 2 root 3 over root 3.
Negative, it is negative. Okay, now remember we want the cosine of pi thirds. So if I'm looking at my hand, pi thirds is this guy. Fold it down, but I only have one finger on top for cosine. So it would actually, instead of being root 3 over 2 flipped, it'd be 1/2 flipped. And if I flip 1/2, I get 2 over 1. Which of course is the same as just negative 2. Either way though. Okay, for the next one, for tan of 0, we're going to do sine of 0 divided by cosine of 0. Okay, so look on your hand. 0 is your pinky. So pinky's here, fold it down. Okay, I have no fingers below my pinky, because remember, sine is down, sin takes you down. So that'd be 0. But then I have all my fingers above for cosine, all 4 of them. Remember, that always comes out to be 1. And then 0 divided by 1, is that going to come out to be undefined?
No.
No. What's 0 divided by 1?
0.
0. So remember, it's only undefined if you get 0 in the denominator, if you're dividing by 0. You can remember it like this. It's okay to get the 0 on the top, but no, you can't have 0 on the bottom. Okay? All right. Next one like that, we want cotan. So remember, regular tan is sine over cosine, but cotan is cosine over sine. And then we want it for 0. Well, then cosine is 1, sine is 0. So basically, I'm just taking what I literally just had, and I'm just reversing it. And then 1 divided by 0, that would be undefined. Okay, the last section is for negative angles. So, does anybody remember from pre-cal? Okay, what do you do when the angle is negative?
You go clockwise.
Yes, you reverse your rotation around the circle. Okay, so recall, a negative angle indicates the direction, okay, that the angle is measured from the x-axis. So, for example, let's say we're doing this one. You can go ahead and think about, so pi thirds, all the rules are going to stay the same. The only thing that's going to change is whether I give it a plus or a minus at the end. So sine pi thirds. Okay, I'm going to look at my hand. 0, pi 6, pi fourths, pi thirds. Fold it down. Okay, then I want sine. Remember, sin is down. So I see 3 fingers here, so I know it's root 3 over 2. Okay, but then on my unit circle, okay, this is 3 pi thirds. But I'm doing negative pi thirds. That means I'm going to start off going this way. So instead of rotating up for a positive angle, you're going to rotate, like he said, clockwise for a negative angle. And so that puts me down here. And then think about your letters. It's all students take calculus. So I'm in cosine's quadrant. That means that for sine, I need to mark it with a negative. Okay. Okay, next one. Actually, let me give you, this is the last thing that we have to do. So let me give you a minute to look at 14, 15, and 16. See if you can do those. Just 3 little math problems left. Okay, so 14, let's see if you got it right. So we're a pi thirds, so that's this one. Cosecant is sine's partner, so I want the bottom fingers, which is root 3 over 2, but I'm going to flip it. So now it's 2 over root 3. And then if I want negative 2 pi thirds, remember that this is 3 pi thirds, so that I'm going to end up here in tangent's quadrant. And if tangent is negative, that means that sine would, if tangent is positive, sine would have been negative, then when I flip it, it should have been negative. Okay, what did we get for 15? Anybody want to share their answer for 15?
I got root 2 over 2.
Positive or negative?
Positive.
Correct. Okay, now remember, okay, it is positive, but what letter am I in for negative pi fourths?
The C.
Yes.
The quadrant.
All students take calculus. You are in the C quadrant. You'd be down here because you would have gone negative pi fourths, right? Versus going up would have been positive, okay? One more left. The last question. Negative 7 pi 6, so we're looking at a pi 6th angle. So remember on your hand, 0, pi 6, pi 4, pi thirds, pi halves, so it's this one. Fold it down. I want cosine. Cosine are my up fingers, so I have 3 of them here. So it'd be root 3 over 2, but then I have to flip it, so it's 2 over root 3. And then I want to be in negative 7 pi 6. So this is negative 6 pi 6. Then I have to go to 7, that would be one more. That's going to put me here. And then remember, it's all students take calculus. And if I'm a secant, that's a cosine flipped. What's the sign of cosine in the S quadrant? Cosine would be, yes, negative. Okay, how are you guys feeling? Thoughts? Anything to share? Are you confused?
It's been way too long since I've done this.
Yes.